Ladies and gentlemen, this is Kurt Sasek. I have Miss Megan Reilly today. She is the founder and CEO of Tippi Toes, which is an organization that brings dance to schools across the country. She has many franchises. She's also a mom, so that alone is a chore in and of itself. And she's also been on Shark Tank, and she is also a podcast host and creator. And the premise of her podcast is interesting because she interviews the moms of well, I guess you could say exceptional people, CEOs, athletes, people like that. So, Megan, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kurt. I'm excited to be here. I like what you're doing.
Well, thank you. So, why don't we start with Tippi Toes? Now, how did that come about? Because, when I think of somebody starting a brand or a business or a franchise, I think most of us think of an actual product, an iPhone or a computer. So how did that come about? Because you're serving something that's, I guess it's like a service, maybe?
Yeah,
Is that right?
exactly. Yeah. So Tippi Toes is the name of my company. My sister actually is a founder. She started it in 1999. She was a sophomore in college. And to this day, we have over 30 franchises in the US and a master franchise in China. And what our company does is
Wow, congrats.
yeah, thank you. We go into daycares and preschools and YMCAs and different locations. We go there and we offer awesome dance classes for kids. We serve kids under the age of 12 from like 1.5 up to 12, and it's recreational, it's fun, it's a positive dance class. And so our franchise owners go into their community and they go where kids and families are. It's a super convenient option for families, which, is why our customers love it. One of the reasons our customers love us. But yeah, Tippi Toes started because my sister and I decided to go to a football game, and she got fired from her waitressing job, and she had a car payment to make, and my parents weren't going to cover it for her. And so they said, you better get a job. And she said, oh gosh, okay, let me see. What am I going to do? What can I do? What am I good at as a sophomore in college? So she went to the local daycare and she was like, can I teach dance to the kids? And parents signed up, and that was that. That was it. That the rest was history. She did it part-time during college. And I joined her a few years later at college, and we both just continued to spread Tippi Toes. And there's a lot of things there in between, but I'll tell you, we didn't envision this right when we started. That's for sure.
Well, I think a lot of people, when they start a business, they don't. It's like, it sounds like your sister is just more out of necessity. Like, shit, I got to put food on the table.
100%. 100%. And for her, she was a sophomore in college, so she was like, she wasn't paying her bills except this one bill, and she couldn't pay it. And and so necessity is really a powerful motivator. It's like, I have to do this or I'm not going to have a car. So sometimes being squeezed like that is just what you need to really catapult yourself to the next level.
Well, as a former chef, I could tell you that some of the dishes that we all know and love were born out of necessity, because of maybe due to availability or because at the time they didn't have refrigeration. I'm referring to confit I don't know if anybody doesn't know what confit is. I won't get into that. This is not a cooking podcast.
But I'm interested. That is really interesting, Kurt. I didn't know that. It makes perfect sense, but I did not know that.
Confit is where, so before there was refrigeration, you take like a piece of meat and you basically, the way many people do it now is you cook it in duck fat.
Okay.
All right. So you would take a piece of, the most common thing is to take a duck leg. There's a process where like overnight you'll put some salt, pepper, some herbs, some garlic, and let that sit on there. And then the next day you rub all that off, submerge it in melted duck fat, and you cook it at a very low temperature for a long time.
Okay.
And you leave it in the duck fat. So that means you put the whole pot, everything in the fridge. So what happens, you get a solid block of fat. And then when you want to go serve those duck legs, you just kind of melt it, warm it up, pull the legs out, you just finish it in the oven. And it just gives such a succulent, rich, culinarily orgasmic.
Yes.
I love confit. Holy shit. Duck confit is freaking phenomenal. But it just like melts. It's so rich. It's fantastic.
So how did that come about out of necessity? What was that problem? What was it solving?
So because there wasn't refrigeration. So if you leave it submerged in the fat, no air can get in there.
Got it. Okay. Oh man, that's so interesting.
Just like prosciutto is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Or any kind of cured ham.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you cure it and you don't have to refrigerate it, right?
Right. Okay.
Now here in America, because we're so, with this is a pet peeve of mine with some of the damn food laws and shit. But like you go to Europe, you can see hams and everything hanging in the store, but in America we have to refrigerate it.
Interesting.
And one of the things that drives us chefs up a wall is that crap. You can't have raw milk, cheese, and anyways, I don't want to
I'm
get
already
started.
learning on
This
your
is not,
podcast. This is great.
yeah. The name of this podcast isn't asshole chef vents. Um, so, but anyways, okay. So, how did you do? This is a good question. Um, how did you determine what to charge? Because what you brought to the public was not something like like if you want to bring a new cell phone, you can say, okay, what's Apple charging? What's
Mhm.
Samsung charging? How did you guys determine your pricing?
The same way, really. We look around because there's dance companies all around. Nobody necessarily
Oh
going
yeah.
into the school, but we are exactly, we're serving the same need. And so we look around, and it's really interesting because city to city it's so different. We have our franchise owner charging something different in Washington D.C. versus our one in Corpus Christi, Texas versus Kansas City, Missouri. So there's all sorts of different price points, and usually there's just a going rate in the town or in the city that we're in.
Wow.
So it's the same, and we didn't know. So we're like, I don't know what it is. Let's go look at the website or call the daycare or call the other dance studios and find out
Yeah,
what they
yeah.
what they do. When we didn't know, we just, you kind of look around or do your own research.
So I've run a number of businesses in my career, but I've never like done a franchise. How does one? So you've created a business, Tippy Toes,
Hmm.
and can you put in layman's terms for anybody out there who may be interested? How do you franchise? Like, so okay,
Yeah.
so Tippy Toes, we want to go to L.A., we want to go to Cleveland, D.C. How do you?
Yeah, I mean, it started for me by reading Franchise Management for Dummies. I had no idea either. I did
Oh,
not know how to do it. I didn't know what it meant. When I heard franchise, I thought McDonald's, and I was like, I don't know. What does that mean? And so I just started reading and learning about what it was. And, the basic concept is, can you take this idea and duplicate it? Can somebody else take this concept and duplicate it? Because a lot of businesses can rely on the owner or the founder and their personality and who they are. They really have to be involved to drive the business, but that doesn't work with a franchise. We need somebody to be able to pick up this box of tools and go execute. And so, if your business, if you're considering something like that, look at your business. Could that happen? And if it couldn't, as it is, could you make a few adjustments so that it could happen if you're interested in franchising? It just has to be able to be replicated. And and
yeah.
so for us, by the time we started franchising, we'd already run the business for 10 years. We were kind of doing it ourselves, kind of naturally
Mhm.
franchising. So we had gone to different cities and towns and had managers that were doing it. And so for us, it wasn't as far of a leap. But I recommend when people come to me asking about franchising, I'm like, try it in a different place, go to a different industry, kind of do it a little bit differently, do it in a different community before you start this huge investment or time suck of trying to franchise your business. Does it work someplace else? What needs to
Yeah.
be adjusted, so basically, I mean, that was it for me. And then I soon realized I needed experts, so I get the basic foundation of framework of like, what are we talking about, but you need to have attorneys involved. But really, that's it. You don't have to be like super well versed. You have to know what you're doing and you have to know your product works, and then make sure you have an attorney on board to make sure you do your contract in a way that will be conducive for your business. And then you
Mhm.
just start selling. And back, you got to believe in what you're doing. And if you believe in what you're doing, you kind of figure out all those details along the way.
Is well, yeah. I mean, like when I think of it's like those four people I mentioned at the beginning who started a liquor brand. They just knew they wanted to do it,
Hmm.
and they had this drive, and they did it,
Right.
and that's enough.
That's more powerful than
Because
intelligence. That's more powerful. Like, if you have the drive, I don't care how smart you are. If you don't have the drive, you're not going anywhere. So,
oh, I know some smart dumb people.
yeah, yeah. And
I know that doesn't make sense,
I
but
think when you're starting something, the motivation is key. And that's also what's going to make it sustainable for you. Because if you are, wanting to do something that's going to be easier in the beginning, it's don't start something, because it's not, because you're going to be doing it a bunch. Because if you really want to make a splash, you've got to be all in. And so that it's, you've got to be ready to really go all in on yourself and your brand and what you're doing.
actually I'll come back to that. So, is there like franchise attorneys? Like, is there
Yes.
attorneys specifically for? Okay, okay.
Yes. Yeah. And
And
so
then so
there's a whole industry. And
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I was going to say there's a whole industry. And it's funny, like, unless you're in it, you don't necessarily know. There's franchise attorneys, there's franchise consultants, there's brokerage companies that just sell franchises, there's website people that just tend to lean towards franchise, because there's all these nuances that go along with a website or with whatever if you're a franchise. So when I have a new franchise owner, I can go through the process of building out the website, but if I'm working with somebody that kind of knows the industry, then I'll say, here's the contact information, and then they'll build out the rest of it. So there's shortcuts along the way once you kind of get into the industry, but there's an expert kind of for every part of it. And I would say you don't need it all. We didn't have all that in the beginning. In the beginning, Sarah and I,
Yeah.
my sister, we were just figuring a lot of things out. If you have the capital and you get the right people and you want to put it all in at the beginning, that's an option. We didn't. We tested everything ourselves. We grew slowly. We were growing families at the same time. So we did it in a way that felt good for our lifestyle, that we were learning along the way. We sold one franchise in the first year and we stopped because we wanted to figure out a whole calendar year with her before we started selling more. So we spent one calendar year with the franchise owner and got through all of her questions. And let me tell you, there were a lot of things that she was like, this is really hard to understand. And we're like, oh yeah, and then she said to us, it would be easier in this format. And we're like, okay, we can do that. And then we adjusted everything. And then going forward, it was always different, But yeah, there are franchise attorneys and laws. There's a lot of franchise laws and a lot of things like that to be aware of.
Well, that could be a lesson for people is if you're going to franchise, when you start your first franchise, give it time and iron out the details before you start doing more. And then, so what, I guess you just pay those people a salary, or they get a percentage of the business, and then is that how a franchise often works?
Yeah. So as far as like the franchise attorney, like, most of them are consultants, and you're hiring them for what you need, or you have them on a retainer or something like that. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about a franchise owner?
No, the person who runs the franchise in DC or
New
York or wherever.
So they, so with pretty much the general franchise model is they pay an initial franchise fee. And that's basically to have rights to use our brand, to, represent our brand, and to get the content that we have available. So in our case, that is using Tippi Toes, our name, our logo, all those things that we've developed. So a franchise owner doesn't have to think about any of that. They just come in and they're like, here's your business. And then in our case, we have all the dances choreographed on video, written out. And again, for just Tippi Toes, we have our own music album. So we've produced 7 music albums. And so it's all Tippi Toes custom music, and they're available on iTunes and Spotify. And so that's part of the package that they're getting, the IP that we have, which is our music. And so that all comes to the franchise owner, and then they're paying a royalty monthly on their revenue. So, and that's typically how most franchises go. There's an initial franchise fee, and then there's ongoing royalties based on revenue.
How did you find your first franchisee? I mean, did you like put an ad in the paper somewhere, or not in the paper, but
back
then,
yeah, you're not far off, Kurt, because it was 2009. So we did have ads in magazines. She was actually, so at the time I was living in Cincinnati, Ohio, running Tippi Toes, and I had just started. I moved there, and I had been running it for about a year. And her name was Andrea, and she happened to live in the Cincinnati area, and she saw it, and she was looking to start a business, and so she started it in a separate 30 or 45 minutes away from where I was. So we had this corporate owned franchise in Cincinnati, kind of in the heart, and she was up further north. And so that was our first franchise. So she just saw it, just as a warm lead, like as a patron of that area that I was serving. And so that's how it happened. Okay. And then along the way, we've gotten, leads from different ways. There's sales people that could come in and do it. There's brokerage firms. We've never used any of that at this point. Many people do. We have, honestly, a lot of our franchise owners have come from being employees of a franchise. So they start as teachers, and then they become managers. Wow. And then they're like, ooh, I like this. I want this to be my life's work. And then they start their own franchise. So there's, that's been an evolution, certainly, in the business, because a lot of people started with magazines or things like that. And then it's kind of developed over time.
Now, okay, it also says on your profile you've made 50,000 mistakes. Holy shit, that's a lot.
And counting.
I'm older than you. I'm at about 51,000.
Yeah, I'm still counting. Yeah, I need to update that number.
I measure mine by my age. I take my age and add thousands to it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Anyway, Um, so okay, so your podcast, you feature moms who are moms to like exceptional
Hmm.
people, which is pretty interesting, by the way.
Thank you.
You mind sharing just maybe two of the best lessons you've learned,
Yeah.
and who the mom and who the son or daughter is?
Yes, I can tell you. I mean, it's been my one of the greatest joys of my life to have these interviews. One of my guests was Ellen Blakely. Her daughter is Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx. And her mom dropped a lot of different amazing pieces of advice. But one of the things she says that she said to me that changed how I parented is she shared the story. She said Sarah would come up to me and she would say she is bored. And I would look at her and I would say, "You've got toys, go figure it out." She's like, "I didn't entertain her. It wasn't my job to entertain her. If she was bored, she could figure out something to do." And I was like, whoa, and so I really took a hold to that because as a mom, I've got 3 kids now, 9 and under, and I entertain them a lot and I put them in camp and I play with them and I give them structure and I don't anymore. Because I'm like, you figure it out. You go, you're bored, go outside, go get a stick, like whatever. It's kind of a little bit of an old school, it sounds like, but you need your kids to be able to figure things out and be on their own and not have a plan all the time. And so letting your kids be bored was a lesson I learned from Sarah Blakely's mom, from Ramit Sethi's mom. Ramit Sethi is a pretty well-known financial expert. And then also, let's see, who else? There's multiple moms that have really successful kids that all were like, let them be bored, let them have time to just figure things out. So that's definitely one of them, and it's something I've added to our
So
to our life.
sorry, before you go on to the next example. So on that note, it sounds like the underlying theme you learned was that the parents encourage them to kind of practice self-discovery or to think on their own.
Absolutely.
Um,
Explore.
and then of course, note to every parent out there: don't worry, the U.S. school system will suck that right out of them. With the
Well, you know what? I think about that a lot because I don't know how much of that's happening at school. So when they do come home, I'm not, at one point, once upon a time, I probably would have said, yeah, you can turn on the TV or, do your homework or whatever. But now I'm like, there's not like we might have dance or something here and there. But for the most part, I'm like, okay, go outside. I don't know. Go play. Go and play in your room. Go make believe. Those kinds
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
things. It's really powerful, and we don't have that as adults very much either. And that's something I need to
Oh,
work
I
on
do.
myself. I need to. I don't. Good for you because it's important to have that time where you're just like thinking. You know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And oh, I'm sorry. And on Sarah Blakely, talking about starting a business, I read an interview with her, and it was educational, as I expected, coming from her.
Hmm.
I knew I'd learn, but she had an interesting point, and it's about starting a business because I can't remember the interview. I think somebody asked a question or something, and the gist of it was this, and I'll always remember this. First of all, you know how sometimes if you talk about your goals, it can kind of water them down. It can kind of kill the goal because you expend too much energy. You're talking about it because I used to do that. I used to be the king of that shit,
Hmm.
and then I've learned. Now you know,
Hmm.
but she said something. I think the question was, I want to start my own restaurant, but I'm afraid my spouse. I can't remember but they wanted to start something big, and they're afraid that what the spouse would think. And she said something. She said, if there's a couple and one of the two wants to do something significant, like start a business, a restaurant, or whatever, or something crazy like you're the Wright brothers, and hey, I want to build a plane. What?
Hmm.
Anyways, so um, she said a lot of times the significant other may try to talk the other person out of it, not out of any with any malintent, but just out of love and
Right.
care because they don't want to see that person get hurt. But she had a quote that I always remember. She said, "Ideas are most vulnerable in their infancy."
Hmm.
And if you share your ideas, then and people are like, "Well, you should be careful, whatever." Then you're going to expend too much energy defending your idea when you should be nurturing it. I said, I'm pretty sure it was Sarah. I would like 99% sure.
No, you're right.
But
It is.
that always stuck with me.
It is her. And she's talked about that, about kind of like in those early days. And it's interesting because I had the same experience with my podcast. Actually, I had somebody helping me. He was like in his early 20s, and I met him at some like music store because I was trying to figure out how to put together a podcast. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know how to get a microphone. Like, what, I need help. And I had like an interview. Like I needed help stat. And he listened to my first interview when it was done. And this was with Jesse Itzler's mom. Jesse is actually married to Sarah. He's an incredible entrepreneur, New York Times bestselling author. He's an amazing human being, all on his own. He's incredible. And I was with his mom. And I finished that interview and I was like, yes, this is amazing. I love it. But I didn't like, it was still all very new. And I had this guy listen to it to like, I don't know, help me in a way or something. And he was like, that wasn't good. I didn't like that. And I was like, what? And honestly, luckily, I was so secure in what I did and what this was going to be and where this would go. And I knew I was still early, so I knew it would still evolve, that it didn't impact me. But had I not had the conviction in my idea, he was like, this sucks, basically. Like I don't know. Because, she's an 86-year-old woman I'm interviewing on a podcast. My guess is this 24-year-old dude, A, has no interest, B, doesn't care, C, thinks I should be, I don't know. Like, I don't know what he was into, but that wasn't his thing. So to that point, yes, like, I think if you are sharing your idea before there's much to look at, I wouldn't expect people to get excited about it. You have to have that passion about it. You have to really care about it, because Sarah's right. If you don't, and you hear some of that negative message and you don't care about it enough, like, that's going to be a tough thing to overcome. So, I think if you are sharing early on, then, if somebody else's opinion sways you that much early on, then you might not be convicted enough in what you're doing to continue. And also that might not be the right thing. Like, maybe you should have let it get some more growth before you really started talking about it. So I think Sarah's point makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you got to have the passion and conviction to defend it. That reminds me of an interview with Gene Wilder. I think he was on Conan O'Brien. He passed away 5 years ago, but he was asked, as everybody does when they interview Gene Wilder, about Young Frankenstein. I don't know if you've seen the movie.
Yep, I know what you're talking about.
One of my favorites, came out in 1974, and he and Mel Brooks got in an argument about a scene. And according to Gene Wilder, he's getting pretty pissed off. And then Mel Brooks was like, okay, well, fine, we'll do it. And then Gene Wilder was like, well, why did you make me go through all that? He said, because I wanted to see how invested you were. I wanted to see how much it meant to you, because now I can tell that you believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was a small business lesson I learned when I watched that.
It's true. It's true. I think that's huge. When someone's looking at starting something or considering a job change or considering a business, it's nobody else's job to cheer for you or to be excited for you or to give you the motivation or whatever. Like, that's all coming from within. And so you've gotta like, if you haven't before, if you're going to start something, this is the time to really stand up for what you think is right. You might be wrong, but who cares? Like, you got to stand up for what you really care about. And that's a huge part. I think that's actually probably something that stops a lot of people from even considering starting, because they're like, what will people think? Who cares? Who cares what people think? You've got, if you see a need, if you see a niche, if you see something that you can do and serve other people or start something special, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. Start running towards it and see what happens.
I agree 100%. But, if you look at, when kids are brought into the world, we teach them, be yourself. You can be anything you want. But then when they get into the school system or society, what happens to anybody who's different or has a different idea? They get made fun of. So we kind of, there's a TED Talk with a guy who, it's one of the best, most viewed TED Talks. He passed away, I think, about a year ago. And I'll try to find the link and I'll share it with you if I can find it. But he talks about that. And he talked about, it was a woman who went on to be, I think, one of the biggest Broadway stars or directors or well-known dancers. I can't remember. Damn. But anyways, when she was a girl, a little girl, I think she was suffering from like attention deficit disorder or something, like certain other people do.
Yep.
And typical chef. And they if I remember him telling the story she correctly, the doctors wanted to like put her on medication and to like kind of sedate her,
Hmm.
which would have killed that. And somehow for some reason they didn't. And thank God, because they she ended up, the contribution she made to the performance arts world.
Yeah.
God, I can't, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
But speaking of podcasts, I've started one, so I know how to start one, no problem. But what have you learned, about growing your audience and being a guest on other people's podcasts? Because, the logical train of thought is put your podcast on your social media, which I agree with. But if you think about it, the only people seeing your social media are the ones you're already connected with. So you're not
Right.
growing.
Right. It's consistency. Like, unless your name is Tom Hanks or LeBron James or something it doesn't matter how many you do, people will show up for it. You've got to show the people that you're going to continue to be there. You're going to continue to show up and you're going to continue to deliver whatever they're expecting from you. So if people come to my
Yeah.
podcast, they're going to expect to get some insight on parenting. I typically do that by, having guests and interviewing a mom, kind of a deep dive with a mom for, 40 minutes or so. A lot of people are like, you need it to be shorter. And I'm like, I don't want it to be shorter because I want to understand this mom. I want to understand what she did,
What
what
fast
she
forward is
thought.
for.
Yeah. And, double time me. I don't care. But I think that's what I want it to be. And I will continue to show up in that way time and time again. And so to me, to build it, it's consistency. It's continuing to show up, and it's kind of letting people want to a little bit know what they're going to get from you. And so if you are consistently showing up in a certain way and serving your listeners in a certain way, they will continue to grow. Don't get into podcasting if you're looking to make a ton of money. Don't get into podcasting if you want to make a big splash and be famous, because it's a long game. It's not a short
Yeah.
game, and it's a different industry than it was 5 years ago. It would be a totally different conversation than 5 years ago. And in 5 years, I don't know if it'll be there. I don't know if it'll be amazing or if it'll be less or what. I mean, there's so many podcasts out there. So the way to differentiate yourself is to keep showing up for a really long time, be consistent. And then, yeah, I go on a lot of podcasts to talk about Tippy Toes, to talk about, entrepreneurial journey. I love to support, especially women that are trying to find their way or coming back after having babies and are like, who am I? What am I doing? Like that narrative. I like to talk about that because I was there. Um, showing people who you are, and then they want a second date with you. So like they hear you maybe on a podcast and they're like, what else you got? I kind of like that Kirk guy. Like, where else is he? And I'm going to go look for them. So you've got to put yourself out there. If you want people to come to you, you've got to be willing to go out to find people. And so I think consistency and then putting yourself out there in different ways, different platforms, different communities is really important.
Oh, so like maybe posting your podcast in different, I don't know, Facebook groups or something like that.
Yeah. And also going on other people's podcasts. So, somebody's coming to your podcast, Kurt, they might not know pretty sure they won't know who I am. They're like, who's this Megan person? Oh, she's got a podcast. Okay. Well, let me go see what that's about. That's interesting. My daughter might like that. My son might like that. My mom might like that. Whoever is taking you in, they didn't know me until I had the opportunity to be on your podcast. So, going out there and showing up in other places and showing up in other communities, so you can spread what you're doing to other people outside of your own community.
Well, cool. Okay, so I'm gonna hit you with two final questions.
Okay.
One, how does one get on Shark Tank?
You just ask. Well, I'll tell you, Kurt, I didn't even apply. My brother-in-law applied for my sister and I to be on Shark Tank without telling us. So we watched season 1. We were on season, or we weren't on, we were watching season 1. My sister lived away. We didn't live in the same place, but we were both like, this was the first show that was about entrepreneurship. And as an entrepreneur, it was like, these are my people. This is amazing. There's this, I didn't know this was out here. I can't believe there's a show about this. This is thrilling. So we were all into season 1. We would talk about after the episodes, all of this. And one of the times when Sarah and my brother-in-law Adam were watching it, he submitted an online form for us to be on it. 6-8 months later, something like that, Sarah gets a call and is like, we are interested in having you on Shark Tank. And Sarah's like, they found us. Oh my gosh, they sought us out. They did not. They got an application that we didn't know was ever submitted. So Sarah calls me and is like, we got offered. And I'm like, oh my gosh. She calls Adam and he's like, oh good, they got the application. And it's like, what application are you talking about? So that's how we got on. My brother-in-law submitted an application. We were back on season 2. So it was not the huge success that it is now. It was still in its early stages. But man, it was super fun. But
That's
ask.
cool.
Usually a lot of times, I mean, that's different because now there's thousands and thousands of people asking. But a lot of times it just comes down to asking. Like when my
Yeah.
podcast, like I'm asking well-known people that are insulated from other people if I can talk to their moms. So I've asked a lot of people and I've gotten a lot of no's. But when you start to get a couple yeses here and there, you're like, okay, it's a numbers game. You gotta throw a lot against the wall and see what happens.
Well, I asked Lewis Howells. I'm sure you know who he is.
Yes.
And how I said, how are you getting how did you start getting like these famous people? He said, look, man, you just keep going. You just keep asking, and he said at some point you are going to get a yes from one of those big people, and then it's
Snowballs.
it kind of reminds me of when you invest money.
Mm-hmm.
Making the first 100,000
Mm-hmm.
is the
Yeah.
hardest, but then after that it's like what's it called, compounds.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
um,
Absolutely.
and then the last question is professional speaking. Now I've done some of that.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you recommend to anybody who wants to be a public speaker but is not doing it? Anybody who let's say somebody out there wants to start, like, wow, I want to be a public speaker, but they don't have footage or they don't have this or that. What do you recommend?
I mean, again, I would say go on podcasts because that's a great way to get in front of people, get in front of the camera. You can, a lot of times rewatch it and be like, wow, I really fumble over this. I say all the time, those kind of things you can definitely do. And it's reps. So a podcast is a
Yeah.
rep of you getting in front of people and talking. The other thing is offering to do it for free. There are plenty of people looking
Yeah.
for speaking opportunities. And I did that. I would call local colleges. I would call my old colleges. It doesn't have to be a cool group. You don't have to be like, look, I'm talking to a group of 7 people in a cafeteria at a church. But like, that's important for you to do at a certain point, So get that
Yeah.
opportunity, get in front of them and be like, maybe you'll be like, I hate that. I never want to do that again. And again, back to kind of the conviction. If you don't have enough conviction for it, forget it. But if you go into the cafeteria with 7 people at the church and you talk about something and you're like, leave fired up, which is what happens to me, no matter what I do, if I'm on a podcast, whatever, afterwards, I'm like, oh, that was so fun. I loved it so much. So if you have that, then you're going to be like, okay, who else can I call? I'm going to call more colleges. I'm going to call more universities. I'm going to call more businesses. I'm just going to ask. Believe it or not, there are people all the time looking for speakers, and they all have different budgets. Some people are like, will you volunteer? And other people are like, I only have 10 grand. So, you've got to just put yourself out there. And I think podcast is a great way to do that. And then offering your services. If you are just starting, if you have not done it at all, start by offering yourself to be on podcasts and tell them why and what you can bring to their podcast. So that takes some research. And then once you've done that, then start to look at and go for the doors that are already kind of cracked open. Go to your alma mater, go to your old high school, go to your old grade school. Offer to talk to the staff at your kid's school about whatever your expertise is. If you're a financial expert and you want to become a speaker, offer to do a free afternoon or free talk to the staff at your kid's school. And I'll bring pizza even. Whatever you need to do to start doing that and see what happens and work your set out, and work out what you want to say and where you can bring
Like
value.
a comedian.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's how you did. That's how I did it. That's how it worked well for me. And it also felt less scary because frankly, like I definitely want to be on all the huge stages for sure, but I don't want to start there. I want to, work some things out beforehand. There's a idea, and I want to say it's Rework, and I always use this example and I really need to figure out where it's from, but the book Rework, I read it early on. I really loved it. It talks about shooting BB ammunition before you fire the cannon. So before you're going to do this big, like, this is it, like, figure things out. And then like you shoot the BBs and you're like, oh, I'm going to move it a little bit this way, before you fire that cannon. And so that's, I would recommend podcasts and then recommend, researching places and trying to get in front of an audience, however you need to, however you can, for free for a while or for as long as you feel like you have to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Well, look, hey, thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and it was fantastic. Now, is there anything I did not cover that we that you would like to say? I want to make, or if you want to do any self promotion, please.
Well, I appreciate it. I would say that if I know people are going to be coming here because they're, looking to figure out how to get started. How do you get that ball rolling? And one of the most powerful things that each one of us has is our own experiences and our own fingerprint and our own perspective. And that is a power. That is something you should lean into. So if you, let's say you love Legos and you're 48 years old and you want to get into whatever, you want to start some sort of business, don't ignore this expertise you have in Legos because you think it's lame. That is a superpower someplace in your story. It's a part of who you are. So that's a weird example, but my point is don't ignore who you are, because then everything gets hard. Then you're covering yourself up. Then you're being awkward, and it's like, I feel like I can't be myself, or I'm really shy. Be shy then. Be shy and do what you still want to do. Like, I just think people so many times try to hide who they are, and that makes everything harder. Show up as yourself. Let your whole self be where you're going to be. And then all of a sudden you're in stride. You're feeling like you know how to be yourself, right? You know how to show up as yourself. It's a lot harder to put on an act. So if you're going to start something, bring your whole self to the table. And, that's why I started my podcast. I'm a mom. Would it have made sense for me to talk about franchising? Probably. It would have been more logical. Would it have made sense for me to talk about kids' activities? That would have been more logical. At this point, I had 18 years of experience in Tippy Toes and running a business and running a franchise. A lot of people would have said, you should have done a podcast about that. Why are you doing parenting? And I'm like, because I'm a parent, because I really care about that, because that's true to who I am. And I want to do it because I'm interested in it. So if you're going to start something, start with who you are. What makes sense for you? What do you care about? How can you show up as your full self to whatever you're going to do? That is the way to start. And it's really important because you're also going to start further down the line, because you're showing up with interest and texture to who you are. You're not just like everybody else that's going to do this. You are this interesting person that's got things to offer others.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I was given some advice years ago. 10 years ago, when I left the chef business, because I was like, shit, this wasn't part of the plan. Because long story short, I had my whole life mapped out from like 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Knew I wanted to be a chef. I was knocking off all the goals one by one. And then in my mid to late 30s, I'm like, I'm not happy. I don't know what I want anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I fought it for about 4 or 5 years. So I'm like, no, I put too much time into this career, man. I can't just let it. I was even angry too.
Yep.
And then I finally relented, because you can only fight the universe for so long.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to a guy who was in a similar boat. He was the CEO of a hotel company. He left at the same age I did, at 41. He said, Kurt, do this. Write down on a piece of paper 3 or 4 things that you love.
Mm-hmm.
Then go find a job that has those things.
Mm-hmm.
If a job doesn't exist that has those things, create one. And maybe that's easier said than done, but I mean, well, look what the Wright brothers did.
Yeah.
Look at those 4 people I mentioned earlier who started their own liquor brand, who had no experience.
Mm-hmm.
But like what he did is, I don't remember. I think he said he loves hospitality, hunting, and I forget the other one. But you know how in Texas, so this is what he did. You know how in Texas there are these places you can go where you can stay on the property and hunt?
Mm-hmm.
They have like deer and shit running around.
Yep.
So that's what he does. So he has like I guess it's like a lodge or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You could pay, you go, you stay in the place. You can hunt on his property. They'll process the meat of whatever you kill. And then you go on your way with your venison steaks or whatever.
Yeah. And he's living his dream life. It's his dream. Like, he's like, I can't believe this is possible. But as soon as you start to lean into who you are, you can design. And that's where that whole I'll never work a day in my life thing comes from. Because he probably doesn't feel like, oh, I gotta wake up and go to work. He's like, I'm at a lodge, I'm taking care of people, I'm hunting, like, life is good, because he leaned into who he is. It's such, and you know what I love about it, Kurt, is anybody can do it. It doesn't cost you more. You don't have, it's takes some self-awareness. You might need to get a counselor, like, people might need to like undo some things in their head if they try to hide who they are, whatever. But like, everybody's capable of showing up as themselves. It doesn't take a connection. It doesn't take a hookup. It doesn't take money. You can do that. And it's a superpower that I think is often ignored by people.
Well, cool. Great feedback. Great feedback. So look, thank you again